Everything you are about to hear may be a lie. This is not a disclaimer. It is not the narrator hedging his bets in case the research is wrong. It is a statement about the fundamental nature of the subject. The Alpha Legion has spent 10,000 years ensuring that every account of their history, every description of their motives, every claim about their loyalty, their leadership, their purpose, and their future is unreliable. They have done this deliberately, systematically, and with a thoroughness that exceeds any other military deception in the history of the galaxy. They may be traitors. They may be loyalists. They may be both or neither, or something else entirely, a category that does not exist in the binary of loyalty and treachery that the Imperium uses to classify its warriors. The Alpha Legion has existed outside this framework for 10,000 years, and the binary has never been able to contain them. Because the Alpha Legion does not operate inside binaries. It operates around them, beneath them, through them, in the gaps between what the categories define and what the categories can detect. This makes them either the most dangerous enemy the Imperium faces, or the most dangerous ally the Imperium has ever had. Both possibilities are supported by evidence. Both are contradicted by evidence. The evidence itself may have been fabricated by the Alpha Legion, by their enemies, by the institutions that have tried and failed to classify them for 100 centuries. The truth about the Alpha Legion is that there may not be a truth about the Alpha Legion, and this absence of certainty is not a failure of intelligence gathering. It is the Alpha Legion's most effective weapon. They are the 20th Legion, the last of the Emperor's Space Marine legions to be created, the last to receive a Primarch, the youngest of the 20 families that the Emperor built to conquer the galaxy. And they are the only legion led by 2 Primarchs instead of 1, twin brothers, Alpharius and Omegon, identical in form and united in purpose, whose dual existence was itself a secret kept from most of the Imperium for the entirety of the Great Crusade. Everything about them begins with a secret. Everything about them builds on a secret, and every layer of secrecy that the Imperium has peeled away from the Alpha Legion has revealed not the truth beneath, but another layer of secrecy, and the peeling has gone on for 10,000 years, and the truth, if there is a truth, has not been reached. Their battle cry is Hydra Dominatus. The Hydra, the mythological beast whose heads regrow when cut. Sever one, and 2 replace it. Kill 1 Alpha Legion operative, and 2 more emerge. Destroy 1 cell, and the network adapts. Uncover 1 plot, and the uncovering itself was part of a larger plot that the uncovering was designed to advance. They also cry for the Emperor. Both may be sincere. Both may be deception. The fact that you cannot tell is the point. This is their story, or rather, this is the collection of accounts, contradictions, partial truths, verified lies, and deliberate fabrications that constitute what the Imperium thinks it knows about the Alpha Legion. Every piece of it should be held at arm's length. Every claim should be tested against the knowledge that the people who generated the claim may have intended it to be tested and found wanting, because the testing and the finding were themselves part of the plan. The Alpha Legion has been doing this for 10,000 years. They are very, very good at it. The Primarchs each have an origin story, a world they landed on, a people who raised them, a set of formative experiences that shaped the being who would lead a legion. Leman Russ has Fenris. Guilliman has Macragge. Vulcan has Nocturne. The stories are clear. The influences are traceable. The connection between the world and the Primarch is legible in the way the Primarch fights, leads, and builds. Alpharius has several origin stories. They contradict each other. This is not an accident. The official Imperial record, the account maintained by the Administratum and cited by those scholars who have been granted access to the restricted histories of the Great Crusade, states that Alpharius was the last Primarch to be found. Discovered on an unnamed world shortly before the Horus Heresy united with his legion at the latest possible moment, the youngest of the brothers, and the one who had the least time to learn from the others before the galaxy tore itself apart. This account may be true. It is also, according to sources within the Alpha Legion itself, completely false. The Alpha Legion's own history, presented in the Primarch's own words in a document that openly acknowledges it may be lying, offers a radically different account. In this version, Alpharius was the first Primarch found, not the last. The first, discovered by the Emperor on Terra itself before the Great Crusade began, before any of the other Primarchs were recovered from the worlds the warp had scattered them across. The Emperor found Alpharius and did something that no one would later believe. He kept the discovery secret. Alpharius was raised on Terra, trained by Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's most trusted human advisor. Given the education of a spy rather than a warrior, the arts of intelligence, of manipulation, of operating unseen within institutions that did not know he existed. While the other Primarchs were being found, celebrated, given legions, and sent out to conquer the galaxy in triumphal fashion, Alpharius was working in the shadows of the Imperium he was supposed to eventually serve publicly. He was present at events the histories record him as absent from. He watched battles he officially did not witness. He moved through the Great Crusade as a ghost, observing, learning, accumulating the knowledge of his brothers and their legions that would later make the Alpha Legion the most informed force in the Adeptus Astartes. This is the version Alpharius tells, in a document that ends by informing the reader that everything they have just read may be fabricated. There is a third possibility, one that the Alpha Legion's own internal complexity supports, but that nobody outside the Legion can verify. In this account, both the official history and the Alpha Legion's alternative are partially true, because both describe events that happened to different beings. The Primarch who was found first was not the same individual as the Primarch who was found last, because there were two of them, Alpharius and Omegon, twin Primarchs. The Emperor created 20 Primarchs. 19 legions received one each. The XX Legion received 2, identical in appearance, similar in capability, connected by a psychic bond that allowed them to sense each other's thoughts and emotions across vast distances. 2 minds in 2 bodies, presenting to the galaxy as a single being. And the galaxy believed the presentation, because the galaxy had no reason to suspect that the Emperor had created twins. Whether the twinning was intentional, whether the Emperor designed the XXth Primarch as a pair for the covert operations the Legion would eventually specialize in, or whether it was an anomaly in the creation process, a biological accident that the Emperor chose to utilize rather than correct, is not known. Like everything else about the Alpha Legion, the question has no verified answer. What is known is what the twins did with their dual existence. They swapped constantly. The being who appeared at one council meeting as Alpharius might be Omegon. The Primarch who led a campaign in one sector of the galaxy might be a different individual from the Primarch who led a campaign in another, and both would claim to be Alpharius. And neither claim could be verified because the twins were identical in every physical respect. They used their dual existence as a weapon, the ability to be in two places at once, to verify intelligence independently, to present contradictory appearances that made it impossible for anyone outside the Legion to know which twin they were dealing with. Even their personalities, while distinct to those who knew both, were presented to the outside world as a single personality. Alpharius, the one the galaxy knew, was the public face, more confrontational, more willing to engage with the other Primarchs, more interested in the political dimensions of the Crusade. Omegon was the shadow, more contemplative, more cautious, the twin who directed the Legion's covert operations, while Alpharius drew the galaxy's attention. This division of labor was itself a deception, because the twins occasionally reversed it. The contemplative one would take the public role. The confrontational one would direct the covert operations. The reversal ensured that anyone who believed they had identified a pattern in the twins' behavior was wrong, because the pattern was not a pattern. It was a mask. The other Primarchs knew about the twins, some of them. Eventually, the knowledge was not shared freely. The twins controlled who knew and when they learned it, and the control was itself a demonstration of the Alpha Legion's defining principle. Information is power, and the distribution of information must be managed as carefully as the distribution of military force. Horus knew. He was the first Primarch Alpharius had encountered, and the relationship between the two was the closest thing either twin had to a fraternal bond with another Primarch. Whether Horus knew because the twins chose to trust him, or because Horus was perceptive enough to notice, is another question, without a clear answer. The Emperor presumably knew. He had created them, but what the Emperor knew and what the Emperor chose to reveal about what he knew were not the same thing, and the Emperor's silence on the subject of the 20th Legion's dual primarchy may have been deliberate, a decision to let the secret serve the purpose it was designed to serve. Everything about the Alpha Legion's Primarchs is layered with this kind of uncertainty. Every fact is shadowed by an alternative. Every account is accompanied by a disclaimer, explicit or implicit, that the account may be wrong. This is not sloppiness in the historical record. This is the historical record being shaped by the subject it describes. The Alpha Legion has made its own history unknowable, and the unknowing is not a failure. It is the masterpiece. I am Alpharius. Every warrior in the Alpha Legion says this. It is the Legion's most distinctive and most unsettling tradition, the deliberate erasure of individual identity in favor of a collective identity that takes the name of the Primarch and distributes it across the entire force. A Space Marine of the Black Templars will tell you his name, his company, his crusade. A Space Marine of the Ultramarines will identify himself by rank, company, and chapter. A Space Marine of the Alpha Legion will tell you he is Alpharius. He is lying. He is also telling the truth. The practice serves a tactical purpose that goes beyond the psychological impact on observers. If every warrior claims to be the Primarch, then the Primarch cannot be identified. The enemy who wishes to target the Alpha Legion's command structure, the standard military approach of eliminating the leadership to degrade the force's effectiveness, cannot distinguish the leader from the LAD. Every warrior is the Primarch. No warrior is the Primarch. The command structure is hidden inside the identity of the Force, and the Force is a hall of mirrors in which every reflection claims to be the original. But the practice also reflects something deeper about the Alpha Legion's philosophy of warfare. The Legion does not believe in individual heroism. It does not celebrate the warrior who distinguishes himself through singular acts of valor, whose personal reputation exceeds the reputation of the Force he serves. The Alpha Legion's victories are the Legion's victories, not any individuals. The plan is what matters, and the plan belongs to the Force, and the warriors who execute the plan are components of the execution rather than the authors of the outcome. This is fundamentally different from how every other Legion operates. The Space Wolves celebrate individual warriors, the sagas of the heroes, the deeds of the champions, the personal reputation that a warrior builds across a career. The Blood Angels venerate their Primarch's sacrifice as the defining act of individual heroism in the Imperium's history. The Ultramarines maintain detailed records of each officer's career, the progression of competence that the moral framework tracks and rewards. The Alpha Legion maintains no such records. Or rather, the records it maintains are unreliable, populated with false identities, alternative narratives, and the deliberate obfuscation of who did what, when, and why. The warrior who executed the critical operation may be credited to a different warrior in the record, or to a warrior who does not exist, or to Alpharius himself. The credit does not matter. The outcome matters, and the outcome is the legions, not the individuals. This produces a force that is, in some respects, more resilient than legions that depend on their command structure for effectiveness. The Alpha Legion warrior who loses contact with his commander does not lose effectiveness, because the warrior's operational capacity does not depend on receiving commands. The plan has been distributed. The objectives are understood. The warrior knows what needs to be done, and he does it. And the doing does not require supervision, because the plan was designed to be executed without supervision. This is operant autonomy, the principle that each element of the Force is capable of independent action that serves the larger objective without requiring coordination with the other elements. The Alpha Legion took this principle further than any other military force in Imperial history and built their entire operational doctrine around it. The doctrine itself is unlike anything the Codex Astartes would later prescribe. The Alpha Legion does not fight conventional battles when a covert operation will achieve the same objective. It does not deploy openly when a hidden deployment will produce a better outcome. It does not engage the enemy directly when the enemy can be manipulated into destroying itself. The Alpha Legion's preferred method of warfare is to win the war before the war begins. To infiltrate the enemy's institutions, political, military, religious, economic, and to corrupt them from the inside until the enemy's own structures produce the outcome the Alpha Legion wants. The battle, if there is a battle, is the final act of a campaign that has been running for months or years before anyone fires a shot. The Alpha Legion warriors who appear on the battlefield are not the first wave of the assault. They are the cleanup crew, arriving to collect the victory that the infiltrators and operatives and sleeper agents have already secured. This is not always how it works. The Alpha Legion fights conventionally when conventional fighting is required. They are Space Marines, equipped and trained for the full spectrum of military engagement. And they are capable of the kind of direct assault that any Astartes force can deliver. But conventional fighting is the Alpha Legion's last resort, not its preferred approach, and the fact that the Legion has been reduced to open battle is, in the Alpha Legion's own assessment, a sign that something in the plan went wrong. Their operatives are everywhere. This is not hyperbole. The Alpha Legion maintains networks of human agents, cultists, spies, embedded operatives, sleeper cells across the breadth of the Imperium. These agents are not Space Marines. They are ordinary humans who have been recruited, trained, and positioned by the Alpha Legion to serve as the Legion's eyes and ears, and, when the moment requires it, hands, a planetary governor whose closest advisor has been an Alpha Legion agent for 20 years, does not know he has been compromised until the advisor acts, and the acting is timed to coincide with whatever larger operation the Alpha Legion is running in the sector. The scale of this infiltration is one of the more alarming facts about the Alpha Legion that the Inquisition has been forced to confront. The Ordo Hereticus maintains files on Alpha Legion infiltration that are classified at the highest levels, and the classification is not because the files contain embarrassing information about the Inquisition's failures. It is because the files suggest that the Alpha Legion's penetration of the Imperium's institutions is considerably more extensive than any public acknowledgement would permit the Imperium's population to know without the knowledge itself producing the kind of institutional paralysis that the Alpha Legion's infiltration is designed to create. The Hydra has many heads. Cutting one reveals another. The Alpha Legion designed itself this way, and 10,000 years have not altered it, because the structure does not depend on any single point of authority to maintain it, not even the Primarch, especially not the Primarch, because the Primarch may be dead, or he may not. Approximately 2 years before the Horus Heresy began, something happened to Alpharius and Omegon that may have determined the fate of the galaxy. The Alpha Legion was conducting a war of compliance on the planet Earth, one of the countless operations the Great Crusade generated as it brought world after world into the Imperium. The campaign was complex. Earth was not a simple military target. It required the kind of multi-layered operation that the Alpha Legion favored, and the twins were directing it with the thoroughness that every Alpha Legion campaign received. During the campaign, the twins were approached by a man named John Grammaticus. Grammaticus was a perpetual, one of a rare group of human beings who could not permanently die, whose bodies regenerated from mortal wounds, who had lived for thousands of years across the span of human history. He was also an agent of an organization that most of the Imperium did not know existed, and that had been operating in the shadows of galactic civilization for millions of years. The Cabal. The Cabal was a council of ancient alien races, including the Eldar, but comprising species whose existence the Imperium had never catalogued and whose age exceeded the Eldar's by orders of magnitude. The Cabal had been observing the development of the Chaos Gods for longer than most species had existed, and they had arrived at a conclusion about the relationship between humanity and the ruinous powers that was both terrifying and, from the perspective of beings who measured time in millions of years, disturbingly logical. The Cabal presented the twin Primarchs with a vision, not a vague prophecy, not the kind of ambiguous foretelling that seers and mystics produce. A detailed, psychically verified projection of two possible futures, each branching from the same decision point, the Horus Heresy. The first future, the Emperor wins. Horus is defeated, the Imperium survives. And then, over the next 10 to 20,000 years, the Imperium decays, slowly, inexorably. The governance calcifies. The wars grind on. The suffering of trillions feeds the Chaos Gods, whose power grows in direct proportion to the misery the Imperium generates. Eventually, in 10,000 years, in 20,000, the decay reaches its terminus. Chaos consumes the galaxy. Humanity and every other species die. The ruinous powers triumph, not through a single victory, but through the slow accumulation of despair that a galaxy-spanning Imperium in permanent decline produces. The second future, Horus wins. The Emperor dies. Humanity is destroyed within 2 to 3 generations, consumed by the chaos-corrupted forces that Horus's victory empowers. Trillions die. The human species is exterminated, but in the destruction of humanity, the Chaos Gods lose their primary source of psychic sustenance. The ruinous powers, deprived of the emotional fuel that humanity provides, weaken, wither, die. Chaos is destroyed, not temporarily, not contained, but permanently eliminated from the galaxy. Humanity dies. The galaxy is saved, or humanity survives. The galaxy is lost. The Cabal presented these two futures to Alpharius and Omegon and asked them to choose. Consider the scale of what was being asked. 2 Primarchs, beings designed by the Emperor to protect humanity, engineered to be the guardians of the species, built from the genetic foundations of the man who had dedicated his existence to humanity's survival, were being asked to decide whether humanity should survive at the cost of the galaxy or die to save it. The choice was not between good and evil. It was between 2 evils, each measured on a scale that exceeded anything a normal mind could process. Trillions of human lives weighed against the existence of chaos itself. The immediate horror of humanity's destruction weighed against the slow, grinding certainty of the galaxy's corruption. Alpharius and Omegon chose. They chose to side with Horus. To help the War Master win the heresy, to ensure the Emperor's defeat, to engineer the death of the species they had been created to protect. Because the death of the species would destroy chaos, and the destruction of chaos would save every other form of life in the galaxy from the fate that the Imperium's survival would condemn them to, they kept their battle cry for the Emperor, because they believed, or they claimed to believe, and with the Alpha Legion, the distinction between belief and claim is never clear, that what they were doing was what the Emperor would want if the Emperor could see the futures the Cabal had shown them. The Emperor, who had dedicated his life to protecting humanity, was also the Emperor who understood chaos better than any other being in the galaxy, And the Emperor, who understood chaos, would understand that humanity's survival, if it meant chaos's eternal persistence, was not survival worth having. This is the Alpha Legion's claim. This is the foundation of the argument that the Alpha Legion is not a traitor force, but a loyalist one. Loyalist to a deeper principle than the survival of the Imperium, loyalist to the cosmic fight against chaos that the Emperor himself was waging, loyalist because the twins believed their father's ultimate enemy was chaos rather than Horus, and that the path to defeating the ultimate enemy required the sacrifice of everything the father had built. Whether any of this is true, whether the Cabal's vision was accurate, whether the futures it described were real possibilities or alien manipulation, whether Alpharius and Omegon genuinely believed what they were choosing or were using the Cabal's prophecy as a convenient justification for a decision they had already made, is not known. The Cabal itself may have been lying. Ancient aliens with their own agenda, presenting a prophecy that served their interests to a pair of Primarchs whose psychological vulnerabilities, their isolation from the other Primarchs, their resentment at being the last found, their hunger for the kind of purpose that the other legions received from their more celebrated gene fathers, made them susceptible to the vision's appeal. The Alpha Legion chose, and the choosing shaped everything that followed. For the Emperor, they said. And they went to war against the Emperor's Imperium. Whether the war they fought was treachery or the deepest form of loyalty is the question that 10,000 years have not answered. The Horus Heresy needed the Alpha Legion in ways that no other faction in the war quite appreciated. The War Master required more than warriors who would fight for him. He had the sons of Horus, who were his own. He had the World Eaters, who would charge anything. He had the Emperor's children, who had surrendered to sensation and fought with the abandon of beings who had transcended fear. He had the Death Guard, who endured. He had the 1,000 Sons, who burned. What Horus needed from the Alpha Legion was not the blunt instrument of military force. He needed the scalpel, the intelligence, the capacity to undermine the loyalist position, not through open war, but through the kind of covert action that makes open war easier. The sabotage, the infiltration, the corruption of intelligence sources, the manipulation of supply chains, the insertion of doubt into institutions that depend on certainty to function. The Alpha Legion provided this. They were the War Master's intelligence arm, operating across the Heresy's theater in ways that the conventional military histories struggled to capture because the operations were designed to be invisible. The Alpha Legion did not fight battles that could be described in the language of military narrative, the assault, the defense, the siege. They fought the war that happened between the battles, the war of preparation and disruption that determined the conditions under which the battles were fought. On world after world, Alpha Legion operatives and warriors sowed discord among the Emperor's followers. Planetary governors who had been loyal were turned or undermined. Military commanders who were planning operations against the War Master found their intelligence compromised, their supply lines disrupted, their communications intercepted. The fabric of the Imperium's coherence The trust between institutions, the reliability of information, the confidence that orders received were genuine orders from legitimate authorities was systematically degraded by an enemy that understood that fabric better than anyone, and that knew exactly where to cut. The drop site massacre on Istvan V was the Alpha Legion's first major visible action in the heresy, and it was the action that branded them as traitors in the official record. Assigned to the second wave of the Loyalist assault, the wave that was supposed to reinforce the first wave's attack on the traitor positions, the Alpha Legion turned. Alongside the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, and the Word Bearers, they opened fire on the Loyalist first wave, completing the trap that destroyed the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard. The Raven Guard survived, barely, as fewer than 3,000 warriors escaped the massacre through 98 days of guerrilla warfare on Istvan V's surface. And it was in the Raven Guard's survival that the Alpha Legion demonstrated the quality of operational thinking that separated them from every other traitor legion. They let the Raven Guard escape, not out of mercy, not from incompetence. The Alpha Legion allowed Corvus Corax and his shattered legion to flee Istvan V because the escape served a purpose that the killing would not have served. The purpose was the Raptor Project, Corax's desperate attempt to rebuild his legion using the Emperor's own genetic template. The Alpha Legion had inserted operatives into the Raven Guard during the chaos of the drop site massacre's aftermath. Legionaries surgically altered to resemble dead Raven Guard warriors, embedded among the survivors, undetectable to the Raven Guard's own screening processes. These operatives accompanied the Raven Guard back to Deliverance, waited until Corax began the Raptor Project, and then sabotaged the genetic template, corrupting the accelerated gene seed process that was supposed to rebuild the Legion, and instead producing monstrous, mutated creatures that were barely recognizable as Space Marines. The sabotage accomplished multiple objectives simultaneously. It prevented the Raven Guard from rebuilding to a strength that could have threatened the traitor position. It produced a psychological wound in Corax, the guilt of creating monsters from his own gene seed, the horror of having to kill his own sons when the mutations made them unsurvivable. That was more devastating than any military defeat could have been, and it secured for the Alpha Legion a copy of the Emperor's genetic template itself, the most valuable piece of biological intelligence in the galaxy, which Alpharius intended to use to elevate his own legion above all others. The Raven Guard sabotage is the Alpha Legion operation that best illustrates how the Legion thinks about war. The objective was not to destroy the enemy. The objective was to achieve multiple strategic goals through a single operation, to prevent a rebuild, to break an enemy Primarch, to acquire valuable intelligence, and to do so in a way that the enemy did not understand was happening until the damage was already done. This is the Alpha Legion at their most effective and their most morally disturbing. The sabotage of the Raptor Project is, regardless of the Alpha Legion's claimed loyalist motivation, one of the most devastating acts of treachery in the heresy's history. The mutated raptors who were born from the corrupted gene seed, who were killed by their own father because the Alpha Legion's sabotage had turned them into monsters, are among the war's most innocent victims. The Alpha Legion's defenders argue that the sabotage was necessary to serve the larger goal, the destruction of chaos through Horus's victory. The Alpha Legion's critics argue that the defenders are rationalizing an act of cruelty that no legitimate strategic objective can justify. Both arguments assume they know what the Alpha Legion's actual objective was. Neither can prove it. The deepest mystery of the Alpha Legion's Heresy-era activities is not what they did. It is what they did at the same time. On one hand, the Alpha Legion fought for Horus. They participated in the drop site massacre. They sabotaged the Raven Guard. They dispatched forces to disrupt loyalist operations across the galaxy. They provided the War Master with intelligence and covert support that the other traitor legions could not match. They were, by every visible metric, committed servants of the traitor cause. On the other hand, the Alpha Legion repeatedly and inexplicably acted in ways that helped the Loyalists. The White Scars of Jagatai Khan were operating in the Kondak system when the heresy erupted, cut off from the wider galaxy by Alpha Legion forces that had blockaded their communications. The Khan and his legion did not know the heresy was happening. They did not know which side the other legions had chosen. They were isolated, and the isolation was the Alpha Legion's doing. And then, in a move that the strategic logic of the traitor cause cannot explain, the isolation was broken. Omegon ordered the destruction of Tenebrae 9-50, an Alpha Legion-occupied pylon array that was blocking the White Scars' communications. The destruction allowed Rogel Dawn's message to reach the Khan, informing him of Horus's treachery. The White Scars learned the truth. The Khan chose the Loyalist side. The White Scars fought their way free of the Kondak system and eventually reached Terra, where they participated in the siege. The Alpha Legion, the force that had blockaded the White Scars, was the force that broke its own blockade. This is the kind of action that makes the Inquisition's analysts reach for the strong recaf and the classified files. The Alpha Legion simultaneously blockaded a loyalist force and ensured the blockade would be broken, simultaneously cut a legion off from the wider war and made sure the legion received the information it needed to join the correct side. The two actions are contradictory unless there is a logic that connects them, a larger plan in which both the blockade and the breaking serve a single purpose that neither action, taken alone, reveals. The Alpha Legion's defenders argue that this is exactly what the Cabal's plan required: the appearance of treachery, the performance of loyalty to Horus, combined with the covert actions that ensured the heresy's outcome would serve the larger goal. The Alpha Legion was fighting for Horus's victory while secretly ensuring that the victory would not be total, that key loyalist forces would survive, that the Emperor's cause would be preserved in enough strength to make the post-heresy galaxy complicated enough that neither side achieved the clean victory the Cabal's prophecy might have required. The Alpha Legion's critics argue that the White Scars incident is simpler than the defenders make it. A legion that was playing both sides, keeping its options open, ensuring that whichever side won the heresy, the Alpha Legion would be able to claim it had been on the winning side all along. Both interpretations are supported by the evidence. Neither is refuted by it. The Alpha Legion has constructed a historical record in which every action can be read as loyalty or treachery depending on the frame, and the frame is always arguable. And the arguing is what the Alpha Legion designed the record to produce. The Iron Warriors incident at the drop site massacre provides another example. While the massacre was raging on one side of the galaxy, the Alpha Legion was involved in a confrontation with the Iron Warriors on the other side, a shooting engagement between two supposedly allied traitor legions whose cause and resolution are not clearly documented. Were the Alpha Legion and the Iron Warriors fighting over a strategic disagreement within the traitor cause? Was the Alpha Legion conducting an operation that the Iron Warriors' presence was interfering with? Was the entire engagement staged to produce confusion in the historical record? All possible, none confirmed. The Horus Heresy novels, the literary works that tell the most detailed version of the Heresy's events, present the Alpha Legion through the eyes of people who cannot understand what they are seeing. Imperial officers observe Alpha Legion operations and cannot determine whether the operations are helping or hurting the loyalist cause. Traitor commanders issue orders to Alpha Legion forces and cannot be sure the orders will be executed as given. The reader is placed in the same position as every character who encounters the Alpha Legion, watching events unfold without the context required to interpret them, never quite sure whether what they are seeing is the plan or the deception that conceals the plan. This is deliberate. The Alpha Legion's Heresy-era history is not a story with a clear narrative. It is a puzzle that may or may not have a solution, and the puzzle's designer may have intentionally made it unsolvable, not because the solution does not exist, but because the existence of a solution would make the puzzle less useful. The Alpha Legion's most effective weapon is not any single operation, any act of sabotage, any military engagement. It is the doubt. The permanent, systemic, irreducible doubt about what they are actually doing and why. The Imperium has been fighting this doubt for 10,000 years. It has not won. 2 deaths, 2 battles, 2 accounts that should resolve the question of whether the Alpha Legion's Primarchs still live. Neither does. The first death occurred at the Battle of Pluto during the closing stages of the Heresy. The Alpha Legions spearheaded an operation to capture the dwarf planet, a strategic position in the Sol system that the traitor forces needed to control before the Siege of Terra could proceed. The operation was ambitious, complex, and characteristically Alpha Legion in its multi-layered approach to the objective. Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists responded with a speed and a directness that the Alpha Legion had not anticipated. The Praetorian of Terra, the Primarch who had built Terra's defenses and who was not inclined to let those defenses be circumvented, drove his fleet toward Pluto with the kind of aggressive maneuver that the Imperial Fists were not generally known for. Dawn was not a subtle commander, but he was a ferociously effective one. And when Dawn committed to a course of action, the commitment was total. The Primarchs met. On the surface of Pluto, or in its installations, or in the void above it, the accounts vary, as Alpha Legion accounts always do. What is consistent across the accounts is the outcome. Rogel Dawn killed the being who claimed to be Alpharius. Killed is a strong word for what happened. Dawn reportedly split the Alpha Legion Primarch's head with a chainsword stroke that was as unsubtle and as final as the Imperial Fist who delivered it. The body was confirmed. The death was verified. The Alpha Legion's Primarch was dead, killed by the most literal-minded of his brothers in a confrontation that the Alpha Legion's own tactical genius had not been able to prevent. Except the Alpha Legion's Primarch had a twin. The being who died on Pluto may have been Alpharius. It may have been Omegon, wearing his brother's identity as the twins had worn each other's identities throughout the Crusade. The death is confirmed. The identity of the dead being is not, because the Alpha Legion made the identity of its Primarchs permanently uncertain, and that uncertainty does not resolve simply because one of the bodies has stopped moving. After the death at Pluto, whichever twin it was, the Alpha Legion continued to function. This is itself notable. Other legions that lost their Primarchs, the Iron Hands after Ferrus Manus, the Blood Angels after Sanguinius, were devastated by the loss. The Alpha Legion barely paused. The remaining twin, whoever he was, assumed the mantle of sole Primarch and continued to direct the Legion's operations with no visible degradation in capability. This is the Hydra. Cut off one head, and the organism continues. The Alpha Legion was designed to function without its Primarch, and the principle was tested at Pluto and proven correct. The second death came after the heresy at the Battle of Escrador. The Alpha Legion, unlike the other traitor legions, did not retreat to the Eye of Terror after Horus's defeat. They moved east toward Ultramar, toward the domain of Robout Guilliman. Whether this movement was deliberate, a calculated provocation designed to draw out the Ultramarines' Primarch, or circumstantial, is debated. What is not debated is that the Alpha Legion and the Ultramarines met on the world of Escrador, and the meeting was violent. The remaining Alpharius Omegon, whoever had survived Pluto, apparently welcomed the confrontation. The Alpha Legion Primarch believed that Guilliman would fight according to his own codex, deploying in the predictable formations that the Ultramarines' doctrine prescribed. Against this predictability, the Alpha Legion's flexibility and multitudinous strategies should have produced a decisive advantage. The Primarch was confident. Guilliman surprised him. The Lord of Ultramar departed from his own doctrine. Instead of the methodical deployment the Alpha Legion had prepared for, Guilliman led an elite strike force directly at the Alpha Legion's headquarters, a quick, surgical assault that targeted the Primarch personally rather than the Legion's military strength. It was the kind of operation that the Alpha Legion itself might have designed, and the irony of being outmaneuvered by a Primarch known for predictability was presumably not lost on the Alpha Legion commander, who found Guilliman's sword in his body. The Alpha Legion Primarch was killed, reportedly, by Guilliman. And then, in a development that should not have surprised anyone who had been paying attention, the Alpha Legion counterattacked. The death of their Primarch, their second Primarch's death, if the Pluto account is credited, did not break the Legion. It was as though the death was irrelevant to the force's operational capability, as though the plan continued with or without the planner, as though the Hydra had been designed to function without any of its heads. The Ultramarines were driven off. After a week of brutal fighting, Guilliman's forces evacuated Escrador, and the Alpha Legion held the field. The victor of the battle in which the Alpha Legion's Primarch was killed was the Alpha Legion. Even the Ultramarines, the most methodical record keepers in the Adeptus Astartes, consider the events at Escrador uncertain. The being Guilliman killed may have been the Primarch. It may have been an operative wearing the Primarch's armor, playing the Primarch's role, dying in the Primarch's place, while the actual Primarch observed from elsewhere. The Alpha Legion's practice of identity obfuscation means that even a kill confirmed by a Primarch against another Primarch cannot be fully trusted. So, 2 deaths, 2 battles, 2 confirmed kills of beings identified as the Alpha Legion's Primarch. And yet the question persists. Is Alpharius dead? Is Omegon? Are both? Are neither? Many within the Alpha Legion seem to believe that Omegon was the twin who survived Pluto and died at Escrador. Others believe Omegon still lives. Some believe neither twin actually died, that the deaths at Pluto and Escrador were staged, that the bodies were substitutes, that the Primarchs who designed the greatest deception in Imperial history would not have neglected to plan for the possibility of their own apparent deaths. The truth is that the question has no verified answer, and the absence of a verified answer is, as always with the Alpha Legion, the most useful possible outcome. A legion whose Primarch is confirmed dead has lost something. A legion whose Primarch might be alive somewhere, directing operations that nobody can trace, watching the galaxy through a network of operatives that spans 1,000,000 worlds. That legion has not lost anything. It has gained something. The fear that the head of the Hydra is still attached. Fear of the unknown is the most durable weapon in the Alpha Legion's arsenal, and the question of whether their Primarch still lives is the most unknown thing in the Imperium. Every other traitor legion retreated to the Eye of Terror after the Heresy. The World Eaters fled into the Warp and became the hunting packs of Khorne. The Thousand Sons retreated to the planet of the Sorcerers. The Death Guard took up residence in the Plague Planet. The Emperor's children scattered into the Eye's pleasure palaces. The Night Lords fragmented into warbands, but gravitated toward the Eye's margins. The Iron Warriors established fortress worlds in the Warp's territory. The Alpha Legion did not retreat. This single fact, the refusal to follow the pattern that every other traitor legion established, is one of the most revealing things about the Alpha Legion's post-heresy identity. The Eye of Terror was the refuge of the defeated, the womb of chaos, where the ruinous powers provided protection and sustenance to the warriors who had fought in their name. Every traitor legion that retreated to the Eye was, in doing so, accepting the bargain that chaos offered: safety, power, and the slow transformation that the Warp's influence produces in everything it touches. The Alpha Legion refused the bargain. They remained in the Materium, in the physical galaxy, among the worlds of the Imperium, moving through the spaces that the Imperium controlled and the spaces between them. They did not seek the Eye's protection. They did not accept the Warp's sustenance. They continued to operate as they had always operated, in secret, through deception, using the Imperium's own institutions as the terrain through which they moved. This decision, if it was a single decision rather than the natural expression of the Legion's existing operational posture, had consequences that extended across the subsequent 10,000 years. The traitor legions that retreated to the Eye were transformed by it. The Warp's influence twisted them, physically and psychologically, into beings that bore less and less resemblance to the space marines they had been. The Eye's time distortion meant that warriors who had fought in the heresy might emerge thousands of years later, still carrying the wounds and the memories of battles that the Imperium had classified as ancient history. The Chaos Legions became something other than the military forces they had begun as: cults, warbands, demon kingdoms, expressions of the ruinous power's will rather than independent military organizations. The Alpha Legion, by staying in the Imperium, avoided the worst of this transformation. Not entirely. Some Alpha Legion warbands have fallen to Chaos's influence over the millennia, adopting the marks of the ruinous powers, accepting the mutations and the gifts that Chaos offers to those who serve it. But the Legion as a whole has maintained a degree of independence from Chaos that the other Traitor Legions cannot claim, precisely because the Legion never submitted itself to the Warp's environment in the way that retreat to the Eye would have required. This independence is either evidence of the Alpha Legion's continued loyalist purpose, a force that serves the Emperor by fighting chaos from within the traitor ranks, maintaining its distance from the ruinous powers while appearing to serve them, or evidence of the Alpha Legion's arrogance, a legion that believed it could use chaos without being used by it, that the relationship between the Alpha Legion and the Warp could be managed the way the Alpha Legion manages everything, through intelligence and manipulation, and the confident assumption that the Alpha Legion is always the one running the game. Whether chaos can be used without the user being consumed is a question that the galaxy has answered repeatedly and consistently with a no. The ruinous powers do not form partnerships. They do not maintain balanced relationships with their servants. They consume, slowly or quickly, subtly or overtly. The influence of the Warp corrodes everything it touches, and the timeline of the corrosion is less important than its inevitability. The Alpha Legion's 10,000-year relationship with chaos tests this principle. If the principle holds, the Alpha Legion's independence from the Warp is an illusion, a self-deception that the Legion's own intelligence should have identified and that the Chaos Gods may be actively encouraging, because the illusion of independence is itself a form of service. The Alpha Legion warband that believes it is using chaos is a warband that chaos is using through the very belief. If the principle does not hold, if it is possible, through sufficient intelligence and sufficient discipline to interact with chaos without being consumed by it, then the Alpha Legion has achieved something that no other force in the galaxy has managed, and the achievement is itself the most dangerous thing about them, because a force that can use chaos as a tool while remaining independent of its influence is a force that has access to the Warp's power without the Warp's price. And that combination makes the Alpha Legion more dangerous than any fully chaos-committed force could be. The Inquisition does not know which of these assessments is correct. The Inquisition has been trying to determine which is correct for 10,000 years. The trying has not produced a conclusion, because the evidence supports both assessments, and the evidence may have been manufactured by the Alpha Legion to support both assessments, because maintaining the ambiguity is more useful than resolving it. 10,000 years without a confirmed Primarch has done to the Alpha Legion what it has done to every Traitor Legion. It has fragmented the Force. But the Alpha Legion's fragmentation is different from the fragmentation of the other Traitor Legions, and the difference tells you something essential about how the Legion was designed. When the World Eaters fragmented, they became hunting packs, warbands bound by nothing except the shared addiction to violence that Khorne's influence produces. When the Night Lords fragmented, they became pirate fleets, individual warbands pursuing their own agendas of terror and self-interest. When the Emperor's children fragmented, they became pleasure cults, splinter groups devoted to the sensation-seeking that Slaaneş's patronage encourages. Each of these fragmentations destroyed the Legion's coherence. The fragments are pieces of something that was once whole, and they no longer function as a coordinated force. They fight each other. They pursue contradictory objectives. They are war bands in the truest sense. Bands of warriors who are at war with the galaxy and with each other. The Alpha Legion's fragmentation looks the same from the outside. Warbands operating independently, pursuing what appear to be unrelated objectives, fighting the Imperium's forces in one sector while seemingly ignoring the Imperium in another. The appearance of incoherence is complete. The Alpha Legion, to the casual observer, has suffered the same entropic dissolution as every other traitor force. But the Alpha Legion designed itself for fragmentation. The operant autonomy that defined the Legion's doctrine, the principle that each element of the force could function independently without central coordination, was not simply a tactical convenience. It was a structural feature. The Alpha Legion was built to operate in pieces, and the pieces were built to serve the same purpose without needing to communicate with each other about what the purpose is. Whether the warbands that currently operate under the Alpha Legion's banner are coordinated, whether there is a central authority directing their actions, whether the seemingly unrelated operations in different sectors are components of a plan that only the planner can see, is the most consequential intelligence question in the Imperium. If the warbands are genuinely independent, if the fragmentation is real, if there is no central command, if the Alpha Legion is just another collection of chaos warbands pursuing their own agendas, then the threat they pose is manageable. Each warband can be identified, tracked, engaged, and destroyed without concern that the destruction of one will trigger a response from the others. The Imperium has been destroying individual warbands for 10,000 years. The Imperium is good at it. If the warbands are coordinated, if the apparent fragmentation is a deception, if the independent operations are actually components of a single strategy being executed across multiple sectors by elements that appear to be unrelated but are in fact directed by a common authority, then the Alpha Legion is not a collection of warbands. It is a legion. Still a legion? 10,000 years after the heresy, functioning as a single force despite the appearance of dissolution, executing plans that span sectors and centuries, and that the Imperium's intelligence apparatus has not been able to detect because the plans are distributed across elements that look like unrelated warbands. The Inquisition's assessment oscillates between these two possibilities and has never settled on one. Individual inquisitors have spent their entire careers trying to determine whether the Alpha Legion's fragmentation is real or performed, and the careers have ended through retirement, through death, through the specific kind of madness that sustained engagement with Alpha Legion intelligence produces without the question being resolved. the Alpha Legion cultivates this uncertainty. Whether the cultivation is active, a deliberate campaign of disinformation, designed to prevent the Inquisition from reaching a conclusion, or passive, the natural result of a legion whose internal culture produces ambiguity as a byproduct of its normal operations, is itself uncertain. And the uncertainty about the uncertainty is a quality of engagement with the Alpha Legion that the Inquisition has come to regard as normal. Some Alpha Legion warbands are genuinely chaos-worshipping. This is not disputed. Warbands that have operated in the eye of terror's margins for extended periods, that have accepted demonic patronage, that bear the marks of the ruinous powers on their armor and in their flesh. These warbands have fallen to chaos in the same way that individual warriors of any traitor legion fall. The warp's influence is corrosive, and 10,000 years of exposure, even at the periphery, produces effects that willpower alone cannot prevent. Other Alpha Legion warbands show no signs of chaos corruption. They fight with the clean discipline of pre-heresy Astartes, their armor unmarked, their weapons standard Imperial pattern, their operations indistinguishable from those of a loyalist chapter conducting a covert campaign. These warbands attack Imperial targets with the same efficiency they attack Xeno's positions, and the pattern of their attacks, when a pattern can be discerned, which is not often, does not align with any chaos-serving agenda that the Inquisition has been able to identify. And there are warbands that appear to be fighting for the Imperium. Alpha Legion elements whose operations, analyzed in retrospect, have produced outcomes that serve the Emperor's cause rather than the enemy's. Attacks on Chaos forces, disruption of Orc wargs before they reach Imperial worlds, the elimination of corrupt planetary governors whose removal benefited the populations they were exploiting. These actions could be genuine. They could also be the outermost layer of a deception whose inner purpose the surface action conceals. The Alpha Legion operates in all of these modes simultaneously. Across the breadth of the galaxy, warbands that claim the same name and the same legacy are fighting for contradictory purposes, and the contradiction is either the result of genuine fragmentation or the most elaborate coordinated deception in the history of warfare. Nobody knows which. The Alpha Legion prefers it this way. The Alpha Legion's most terrifying capability is not its space marines, it is its humans. Every military force in the Imperium is, at some level, dependent on the space marines who lead it. The Astartes are the irreplaceable asset, the transhuman warriors whose individual capability exceeds anything that mortal soldiers can match. Remove the Space Marines from any chapter's operations and the operations collapse, because the Space Marines are the force that makes the operations possible. The Alpha Legion has built something different. A network of human operatives, ordinary mortals, without gene seed augmentation, without the physical capability of an Astartes, who function as the Legion's primary intelligence and operations infrastructure across the Imperium. These operatives are not support personnel. They are the Legion's forward edge. The agents who are present on worlds that no space marine could reach without detection, embedded in institutions that no transhuman warrior could infiltrate without arousing suspicion. They are everywhere. This is not hyperbole, and it is not paranoia. Though the distinction between accurate assessment and paranoid overreaction is one of the things the Alpha Legion exploits when the subject of its infiltration is raised in Imperial security councils. The Alpha Legion maintains operative networks on worlds across every segmentum, in institutions that range from planetary governments to military headquarters to administratum offices to ecclesiastical parishes. The operatives are recruited locally. They are people who were born on the worlds they operate on, who have lived in the communities they monitor, who are indistinguishable from the populations they are embedded in because they are members of those populations. The recruitment is patient. The Alpha Legion does not approach a potential operative and offer them a deal. The process takes years. The operative is identified through observation. Someone with the right combination of access, intelligence, and personal motivation is selected and cultivated through a graduated sequence of interactions that moves from casual contact to active recruitment without ever producing a single moment where the operative understands that the thing recruiting them is the Alpha Legion. By the time the operative is active, by the time they are passing information, influencing decisions, positioning themselves to act when the Alpha Legion requires action, they may not know who they are working for. They may believe they are serving a noble cause within the Imperium's own institutions. They may believe they are part of a reform movement or a resistance network or a humanitarian organization. The Alpha Legion provides the context that the operative's psychology requires, and the context is tailored to the individual. The cells are isolated. Operatives in the same city may not know each other. Cells on the same world may not know the other cells exist. The information flows upward through channels that the operatives cannot trace, and the instructions flow downward through channels that the operatives cannot verify. The structure is designed to be resistant to compromise. If one cell is discovered, the discovery does not cascade to the others, because the cells are not connected at the level that the discovered cell operates at. This is intelligence tradecraft raised to the level of institutional architecture. The Alpha Legion has taken the principles of espionage that mortal intelligence agencies have used for millennia and applied them at a scale that mortal agencies cannot match, because the Alpha Legion has been building these networks for 10,000 years. And the networks have an institutional continuity that no mortal agency can sustain. The cults are the most visible manifestation. On worlds across the Imperium, organizations that appear to be local phenomena, political movements, religious cults, criminal enterprises, mutual aid societies, are in fact Alpha Legion front organizations. They recruit members who do not know the organization's true purpose. They accumulate resources, influence, and intelligence over decades or centuries, and when the Alpha Legion needs them, they activate. The activation is the moment when the cover drops and the organization's true purpose is revealed. The political movement that was lobbying for reforms becomes the insurrection that overthrows the planetary government. The religious cult that was providing community services becomes the fighting force that seizes the communications hub. The criminal enterprise that was running smuggling operations becomes the logistics network that supplies an Alpha Legion strike force with weapons, ammunition, and intelligence. The transformation is swift because it was planned from the beginning. The organization was always the weapon. The decades of cover were the weapon's preparation. The activation is the trigger, and the trigger was built into the weapon's structure at the moment of its creation. The Inquisition hunts these networks constantly. The Ordo Hereticus and the Ordo Malleus both maintain active programs targeting Alpha Legion infiltration. And the programs have produced results. Cells have been identified and destroyed. Operatives have been captured and interrogated. Front organizations have been exposed and dismantled. The Inquisition is not helpless against the Alpha Legion's infiltration, but the Inquisition operates with the disadvantage that every hunter faces against an enemy that designs its escape routes before it designs its attacks. Every Alpha Legion network that the Inquisition discovers is a network that the Alpha Legion anticipated might be discovered, and the discovery itself may serve the Legion's purposes, drawing inquisitorial resources toward the compromised network and away from the networks that are still functioning. The Hydra's heads cut one, and two more grow. The scale of what the Alpha Legion has built inside the Imperium, the depth of the infiltration, the breadth of the networks, the penetration that 10,000 years of patient investment have produced, is one of the most closely guarded intelligence assessments in the Imperium. Not because the assessment is embarrassing to the Inquisition, though it is. Because the assessment, if widely known, would produce the kind of corrosive paranoia that would do more damage to the Imperium's functioning than the infiltration itself. If every planetary governor suspects his advisors are Alpha Legion agents, governance becomes impossible. If every military commander suspects his intelligence is compromised, command becomes impossible. If every institution assumes it has been penetrated, the institutions stop functioning, and the Imperium relies on its institutions to function because the alternative is the kind of decentralized chaos that would make the Alpha Legion's operations even easier. This is the trap. The knowledge of the infiltration is itself a weapon that the Alpha Legion can deploy when the standard infiltration reaches its limits. When the operatives and the cells and the cults are not sufficient, the Alpha Legion can use the fear of the operatives and the cells and the cults, the paralyzing awareness that the Imperium's own institutions may be working against it, to achieve the disruption that the physical infiltration could not. The most effective weapon is the one that works even when you know it exists. The Alpha Legion's infiltration of the Imperium works even when the Imperium knows about it, because knowing about it does not tell you where it is or what it is doing or how to stop it without stopping the institutions that the infiltration has penetrated. 10,000 years. 10,000 years of building, cultivating, positioning, activating, and replacing the networks that constitute the Alpha Legion's presence inside the Imperium. The Imperium is the Alpha Legion's camouflage, and you cannot remove the camouflage without destroying the thing it conceals. Before the heresy, before the cabal, before the choice that made them traitors or the deepest loyalists the galaxy has ever seen, the Alpha Legion was a fighting force of extraordinary capability. This is sometimes lost in the discussion of the Alpha Legion's mysteries and deceptions. The Legion was not simply a spy agency in power armor. It was a military force, space marines, equipped and trained to the standard that the Emperor's genecraft produced, capable of the full spectrum of warfare that the Great Crusade demanded. The Alpha Legion fought conventional battles. It took worlds. It broke enemy defenses. It did the things that legions did. And it did them well. But it did them differently. The Alpha Legion's approach to compliance, the bringing of new worlds into the Imperium, was characteristically indirect. Where the World Eaters would assault the planetary capital and kill everything that resisted, where the Iron Hands would identify the enemy's strongest position and destroy it with overwhelming force, where the Imperial Fists would besiege the enemy's fortifications and grind them into submission. The Alpha Legion would spend weeks or months preparing the ground before the first shot was fired. Operatives would infiltrate the target world's institutions. The power structures would be mapped. The fault lines in the society, the tensions between factions, the grievances that the population carried, the exploitable gaps between what the rulers promised and what the rulers delivered would be identified and catalogued. And then, systematically, the Alpha Legion would exploit those fault lines. Rebellions would erupt in the enemy's rear areas, timed to coincide with the Alpha Legion's military advance. Supply chains would collapse as the workers who maintained them received information from sources they trusted, planted by the Alpha Legion months earlier, that their employers were about to betray them. Key military commanders would make decisions that looked reasonable in the moment and that were, in fact, responses to intelligence that the Alpha Legion had fabricated and introduced into the enemy's decision-making process. By the time the Alpha Legion's Space Marines arrived in force, the enemy's defenses were already failing. Not because the defenses were weak, but because the ground beneath them had been removed. The society that the defenses were supposed to protect was in revolt. The military that was supposed to man the defenses was responding to false intelligence. The leadership that was supposed to coordinate the defense was making decisions based on information that the Alpha Legion had designed to produce incorrect decisions. The conquest looked easy. It was not easy. It was the product of months of covert preparation that made the visible part of the campaign appear effortless, and the appearance of effortlessness was itself part of the Alpha Legion's method, because a force that appears to conquer effortlessly acquires a reputation for invincibility, and the reputation produces the psychological conditions that make subsequent conquests easier. The other Primarchs noticed this, and their reactions were mixed. Horus was impressed. The War Master appreciated the Alpha Legion's results, even when he did not fully understand the methods, and the relationship between Horus and Alpharius was the closest thing either twin had to a genuine fraternal bond. Horus valued capability, and the Alpha Legion's capability was undeniable regardless of how uncomfortable the methods made some of their brothers. Robert Guilliman was suspicious. The Lord of the Ultramarines valued transparency and institutional accountability, and the Alpha Legion provided neither. Guilliman's codex-based philosophy of warfare assumed that the methods used to achieve a victory mattered as much as the victory itself, and the Alpha Legion's methods, the deception, The manipulation, the use of civilian populations as instruments of the campaign violated principles that Guilliman considered fundamental to the Astartes' purpose. Rogal Dorn was hostile. The Praetorian of Terror saw the Alpha Legion's indirectness as a form of cowardice, the refusal to face the enemy directly, the reliance on tricks and manipulations that a warrior of honor would not employ. Dorn was a builder, a fortifier, a primarch whose understanding of war was built around the direct application of force against the enemy's strength. The Alpha Legion's approach was the antithesis of everything Dorn valued. Corax was ambivalent. The Raven Guard used stealth and covert operations as well, and the similarities between the Raven Guard's approach and the Alpha Legion's were visible enough that some observers grouped them together. But Corax's stealth was different from the Alpha Legion's. Corax used concealment to protect the innocent and to target the guilty, while the Alpha Legion used deception without particular concern for who was affected by the deception. The distinction between concealment and manipulation was the distance between the two legions' philosophies. Conrad Kurze was the one primarch who might have understood the Alpha Legion's methods intuitively, but Kurze's understanding was filtered through his own madness, and any insight he might have had was corrupted by the lens through which he processed everything. The conviction that the universe was cruel, and that cruelty was the only honest response. The Great Crusade's final decades saw the Alpha Legion operating at peak capability, conducting complex, multi-layered campaigns across multiple sectors, building the intelligence networks that would later serve the Legion during the Heresy, developing the doctrine that would make them the most effective covert force in the galaxy. The twins directed the Legion's operations with a coordination that the other Primarchs could not replicate, because the other Primarchs had one mind each, and the twins had two, and two minds operating in concert across different theaters produced an operational coherence that a single commander could not match. The Legion's strength was substantial. The Alpha Legion had been quietly building its numbers throughout the Crusade, recruiting from sources that the other legions had not exploited, and maintaining reserves that the official records did not fully capture. The actual size of the Alpha Legion at the Heresy's outbreak is not known with certainty, because the Alpha Legion ensured that its numbers were as difficult to verify as everything else about it. This was the force that stood at the crossroads when the Cabal's prophecy arrived. Not a damaged legion, not a desperate one, not a force that had been driven to the traitor side by grievance or corruption. A fully functional, highly capable military force led by two of the Emperor's most intelligent sons, making a choice that they believed would save the galaxy at the cost of the species their father had created them to protect. Whether the choice was wise or catastrophic is a question that the Alpha Legion's subsequent 10,000 years of ambiguous activity has not answered. The Alpha Legion's gene seed produces warriors who are, by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes, unremarkable. This is itself remarkable. Every other legion's gene seed produces warriors with identifying characteristics: the Blood Angels' physical beauty, the Space Wolves' canine features, the Raven Guard's pallor, the Salamander's coal-black skin, and red eyes. These characteristics make the warriors of their respective legions identifiable at a glance, which serves institutional purposes, but also creates a signature that an enemy can recognize. The Alpha Legion's warriors do not have a signature. Their gene seed produces Space Marines, who look like Space Marines, large, augmented, physically formidable, but without the distinctive biological markers that would identify them as products of a particular genetic lineage. An Alpha Legionnaire with his armor removed and his heraldry concealed could pass as a member of almost any legion, and the Alpha Legion has used this biological anonymity as an operational tool throughout its history. There is one distinctive feature, though it is not biological. Alpharius was notably shorter than most Primarchs, closer to the height of his own warriors than the towering stature that the other Primarchs displayed. This meant that the gap between the Primarch and his warriors was less pronounced than in other legions, which the twins exploited extensively. When every warrior claims to be Alpharius, and the real Alpharius is not substantially larger than his warriors, the deception is considerably more effective than it would be if the Primarch towered over his sons by meters. The Legion also encouraged its warriors to undergo surgical and cosmetic modification to increase their resemblance to the Primarch. An Alpha Legion force might contain dozens of warriors who had been modified to look like Alpharius, any one of whom might be the real Primarch, or neither of whom might be, because the real Primarch might be somewhere else entirely, watching the engagement from a position that the enemy did not know was occupied. The armor is the Legion's most recognizable feature, a blue-green metallic sheen, the color of the deep ocean, or of certain minerals under specific lighting conditions, adorned with the Hydra's symbol. The armor is distinctive enough to identify the Legion, but the color choice is itself a form of ambiguity. In different lighting conditions, the armor appears different colors, blue in some lights, green in others, silver in certain angles. The enemy who has been told to watch for blue-armored warriors may not recognize the green-armored force approaching from a different direction as the same force. The Legion's tactical formations reflected the doctrine of deception at every level. Standard tactical elements, squads, companies, battalions existed within the Alpha Legion, but the correspondence between the organizational structure and the actual deployment was never straightforward. A unit designated as a tactical squad might operate as an infiltration team. A unit organized as a headquarters element might function as a reconnaissance force. The designations were covers, and the covers were maintained even within the Legion's own administrative records, because the Alpha Legion did not fully trust its own records. This last point is worth pausing on. The Alpha Legion does not fully trust anything, including itself. The twins built the Legion's culture around the principle that any piece of information might be compromised, any channel might be monitored, any warrior might have been turned or replaced, or might be operating under orders that differ from the orders the warrior's immediate commander believes have been issued. The result is an institutional culture that is simultaneously the most informed and the least trusting in the Adeptus Astartes, a force that gathers more intelligence than any other, and that believes less of what it gathers, because the gathering itself might be part of someone else's operation. Living inside this culture, produces warriors who are psychologically different from those of other legions. An Alpha Legionnaire does not have the simple loyalty of an Ultramarine or the fierce devotion of a Black Templar. He has a conditional awareness, the understanding that the thing he is doing serves a purpose he may not fully know, that the orders he is following may have been issued for reasons he has not been told, that the operation he is executing may be a component of a larger plan that his level of clearance does not include. This does not make Alpha Legionnaires less committed. It makes them differently committed not to a cause they fully understand, but to a process they trust. The process is the Legion. The Legion has a purpose. The purpose may not be visible from the individual warrior's position within the Legion, but the warrior trusts that the purpose exists and that his actions serve it. This is either the most sophisticated form of military discipline in the galaxy or the most effective method of self-deception. The Alpha Legionnaire who fights without knowing why he is fighting is either a warrior serving a plan too complex for any single mind to encompass, or a warrior who has been tricked into serving a purpose that does not exist. Both possibilities are maintained by the Legion. Neither is confirmed. The individual warrior's experience of fighting for the Alpha Legion is the experience of executing missions whose purpose is not explained, trusting a chain of command whose ultimate authority is unknown, and accepting that the acceptance itself is the warrior's contribution to the Legion's effectiveness. I am Alpharius. The statement is not just a deception directed at the enemy, it is the warrior's relationship to his own ignorance, the acceptance of a collective identity because the individual identity has been subsumed by a purpose too large for the individual to see. Whether the purpose is real is the question the warrior cannot answer, and the inability to answer is the answer. What is it like to be an Alpha Legionnaire? The question sounds simple. Every other chapter in the Adeptus Astartes offers an answer that, while complex in detail, is understandable in principle. To be an Ultramarine is to serve the framework. To be a Black Templar is to serve the faith. To be a Blood Angel is to carry the curse with grace. To be a Space Wolf is to run with the pack. The identity is legible. The warrior knows what he is. To be an Alpha Legionnaire is to not know. The warrior receives orders. The orders come from a source he cannot verify, through a channel he cannot trace. The orders direct him to execute an operation whose purpose is not explained. He is told what to do. He is not told why. The why is above his level of clearance, or it does not exist in a form that can be communicated, or the why is the operation itself, a self-referential loop in which the purpose of the action is to produce conditions that make the action necessary. He does not question this, not because questioning is forbidden. The Alpha Legion does not maintain the rigid discipline that the Ultramarines enforce, or the religious obedience that the Black Templars demand. Questioning is simply unproductive. The warrior who asks why he is executing an operation will receive an answer that may or may not be true, and the truth or falsity of the answer does not change what the warrior needs to do. The operation is the operation. The warrior executes it. The execution is the warrior's contribution. This produces a quality of psychological detachment that observers from other chapters find deeply unsettling. The Alpha Legionnaire fights with competence and without passion, not the controlled fury of the Black Templar or the disciplined aggression of the Ultramarine, but the disengaged proficiency of a warrior who has separated the act of fighting from any emotional investment in the fight's outcome. He fights because the operation requires fighting. When the fighting is done, he withdraws. When the withdrawal is done, he waits for the next operation. The bonds between Alpha Legionnaires are different from the brotherhood that other chapters cultivate. There is camaraderie. The warriors train together, fight together, survive together, and the shared experience of survival creates connections that are real even in an institution that systematically undermines the concept of individual identity. But the camaraderie is overlaid with the awareness that the warrior beside you may not be who he appears to be. The operative who has been your squad mate for a decade may be reporting to an authority you do not know about. The veteran who has mentored you may be executing a role that the mentorship was designed to position him for. This sounds paranoid. It is not paranoia if the institution was designed to produce these conditions. The Alpha Legion's internal culture rewards certain qualities that other chapters' cultures do not emphasize. Adaptability, not in the tactical sense, though tactical adaptability is valued, but in the psychological sense, the ability to occupy a role without becoming attached to it, the capacity to maintain a cover identity for years and then abandon it without the identity crisis that most beings would experience when the self they have been presenting turns out to have been a performance. The willingness to be nobody, to have no individual identity that transcends the current mission's requirements, to accept that the self is a tool and that the tool's shape is determined by the mission rather than by the warrior's preferences. This is either the most liberating or the most dehumanizing form of military service in the galaxy, depending on how you define humanity. A warrior who has been freed from the need to maintain a consistent identity is a warrior who can be anything the situation requires. He can infiltrate a loyalist chapter's operations without the guilt that a warrior with a fixed identity would feel, because his identity is not fixed, and the infiltration does not violate a self that does not exist in the permanent sense. He can fight alongside chaos forces without the corruption that a warrior with a committed soul would experience, because his soul is not committed to anything except the Legion's purpose. And the Legion's purpose is flexible enough to accommodate temporary alliance with forces the warrior might personally despise. But a warrior who has no fixed identity is also a warrior who has no anchor. The Black Templar has his faith. The Ultramarine has his doctrine. The Blood Angel has his curse. These are not only burdens, they are structural elements that hold the warrior together, that give the self a shape it can maintain across centuries of service. The Alpha Legionnaire has none of these. His shape is whatever the mission requires, and when the mission changes, the shape changes. And what the warrior is between missions, when no role is being occupied, when no cover is being maintained, when the warrior is simply a warrior without a mask, is a question that the Alpha Legion's culture does not encourage its warriors to ask. Some warriors ask it anyway. The Alpha Legion's history contains accounts, fragmentary, unreliable, possibly fabricated, of warriors who reached the point where the question of who they actually were became unanswerable. and the inability to answer produced a crisis that the Legion's structures could not manage. These warriors broke, not from combat stress, but from identity stress, the accumulated weight of years of being nobody, producing a collapse in the warrior's ability to function as anything. The Alpha Legion manages these breakdowns the way it manages everything, quietly, efficiently, without acknowledgement. The warrior is removed from service. What happens to him afterward is not discussed. I am Alpharius, as the statement is the warrior's identity. It is also the acknowledgement that individual identity is less important than the collective identity. It is also the mask that the warrior wears, because the alternative, identifying as himself, with all the vulnerability that individual identity creates, is not compatible with the Alpha Legion's operational requirements. The warrior says it and means it. He is Alpharius. Every warrior is Alpharius. There is no self beneath the name that the name is concealing, or there is, and the concealing is the warrior's daily act of sacrifice, the surrender of the self in service of a purpose too large for the self to encompass. The Alpha Legionnaire does not know which of these is true. He has stopped trying to find out. The not knowing is the condition of service. The condition is permanent. The Imperium has been fighting the Alpha Legion for 10,000 years. In that time, it has developed approaches, doctrines, and responses to the Legion's methods. It has trained Inquisitors to identify Alpha Legion infiltration patterns. It has established screening protocols for military units, planetary administrations, and ecclesiarchal hierarchies that are designed to detect the presence of Alpha Legion operatives. It has maintained classified databases of known Alpha Legion tactics, identified operatives, and suspected networks. None of it is sufficient. The Imperium knows this. The insufficiency is not a failure of effort, it is a feature of the problem. Fighting the Alpha Legion is not like fighting an enemy that can be located, engaged, and destroyed. It is like fighting a disease that has no single source of infection, a pathology distributed across the body of the Imperium itself, whose symptoms are visible, but whose origin cannot be traced, because the origin is everywhere. The Ordo Hereticus maintains the Imperium's most extensive files on Alpha Legion activities. These files are classified at the highest levels, and access to them requires authorization that most Inquisitors do not possess. The reason for the classification is not the embarrassment of the Inquisition's failures, though the failures are real and documented. The reason is that the files themselves may be compromised. This is the specific nightmare that Alpha Legion intelligence produces. The Inquisitor who opens a file on Alpha Legion activities and reads the intelligence it contains must consider the possibility that the intelligence was placed in the file by the Alpha Legion. That the operative whose identity the file reveals was an operative the Alpha Legion wanted identified. That the network the file describes was a network the Alpha Legion wanted the Inquisition to focus on, because the focus on one network draws resources away from the networks that the Alpha Legion wants to protect. The Inquisition has been navigating this hall of mirrors for millennia. The navigation requires a quality of institutional paranoia that is difficult to sustain without the paranoia itself becoming debilitating. An Inquisitor who trusts nothing accomplishes nothing, because action requires a baseline of confidence in the information that drives the action. An Inquisitor who trusts everything is an Inquisitor who is being used. The effective Alpha Legion hunters, the Inquisitors and the military commanders who have achieved genuine successes against the Legion's operations tend to share certain qualities. They are pragmatic rather than ideological. They focus on outcomes rather than intentions. They accept that they will never fully understand the Alpha Legion's purposes and concentrate instead on disrupting the Alpha Legion's operations, regardless of what those operations are intended to achieve. This approach, the disruption of means rather than the understanding of ends, is the most effective tool the Imperium has developed against the Alpha Legion. You do not need to know why the Alpha Legion has placed an operative on a particular world to know that the operative should be removed. You do not need to understand the larger plan to know that the cell that has been identified should be destroyed. The action does not require comprehension. It requires capability. The Space Marines who have fought the Alpha Legion in direct combat report a different experience from fighting other traitor legions. The Night Lords fight with terror. The World Eaters fight with fury. The Death Guard fight with pestilent endurance. The Alpha Legion fights with intelligence. The application of force at the point where the force produces maximum disruption. The withdrawal before the engagement reaches the point of decisiveness. The constant sense that the battle you are fighting is not the battle the Alpha Legion is interested in. Commanders who have engaged Alpha Legion forces describe the experience of fighting an enemy that seems to be testing you, probing your reactions, evaluating your responses, gathering intelligence about your force's capabilities and command style through the engagement itself. The battle is data collection. The kills are incidental. The Alpha Legion is not trying to defeat you in this engagement. It is trying to learn enough about you to defeat you in the next one, or to manipulate you in a subsequent operation that you will not recognize as an Alpha Legion operation, because the intelligence gathered in this engagement will be used to design it. This is not an enemy you can outfight. You can outthink it, potentially, if your thinking is flexible enough and your institutional responses are fast enough and your willingness to second-guess your own conclusions is strong enough to resist the Alpha Legion's manipulation of the information you are thinking with. But outthinking the Alpha Legion requires knowing what the Alpha Legion is thinking. And the Alpha Legion has spent 10,000 years ensuring that nobody knows what it is thinking. The result is a war without resolution. The Imperium fights the Alpha Legion. The Alpha Legion fights the Imperium. Neither side wins decisively because the Alpha Legion does not seek decisive military victory, and the Imperium cannot achieve decisive intelligence victory against a force that has made its own intelligence unknowable. The war continues, generation after generation, Inquisitor after Inquisitor, in the specific grinding stalemate that the Alpha Legion may have designed the war to produce. Because a war without resolution is a war without end. And a war without end is a war that the Alpha Legion can use for purposes that the end of the war would prevent. The Alpha Legion does not want to win. Or rather, the Alpha Legion's definition of winning may not be the same as the Imperium's. And the difference between those definitions is the space in which the Alpha Legion operates. The Alpha Legion's operational record in the 41st millennium is a catalogue of contradictions. and the contradictions are the record's most reliable feature. The Indomitus Crusade encountered Alpha Legion resistance in multiple sectors as Guilliman drove his forces outward from Terra. The resistance took different forms in different locations. In some sectors, Alpha Legion warbands fought the Crusade's forces directly, engaging the Primaris reinforcements and the Crusade's fleet elements with conventional military force. In other sectors, Alpha Legion operations preceded the Crusade's arrival, destabilizing the worlds the Crusade was attempting to reach before the Crusade could get there. In at least one documented case, an Alpha Legion cell assisted the Crusade. A world that should have been defended by the Alpha Legion's network was instead delivered to the Crusade's forces with its defenses dismantled from the inside by operatives who identified themselves as Alpha Legion and who provided the Crusade's commanders with intelligence about the sector's strategic picture before disappearing. The commanders reported the incident. The intelligence was verified and found to be accurate. The cell was never contacted again. The 13th Black Crusade, Abaddon's final and most devastating assault from the Eye of Terror, the crusade that destroyed Cadia and opened the Great Rift, saw Alpha Legion forces engaged on multiple sides of the conflict. Warbands fought alongside Abaddon's forces in the assault on Cadia's defenses. Other Alpha Legion elements were reported operating in the rear areas of the Black Legion's advance, conducting operations whose purpose the Black Legion's own intelligence could not determine. Whether these rear area operations were in support of Abaddon's campaign, in opposition to it, or in pursuit of an objective unrelated to either side's goals, is not known. The Alpha Legion operated during the 13th Black Crusade as it operates during every major galactic conflict, on multiple sides, pursuing multiple objectives, producing outcomes that benefit contradictory causes. The fall of Cadia, the event that shattered the Imperium's primary fortress against the Eye of Terror, and that directly produced the Great Rift, is an event that the Alpha Legion's involvement in has never been fully characterized. Were Alpha Legion forces among those who fought to bring Cadia down? Were other Alpha Legion forces among those who fought to hold it? Did the Alpha Legion's accumulated intelligence about Cadia's defenses, intelligence gathered over millennia of operations in the Cadian Gate region, contribute to Abaddon's ability to breach defenses that had held for 10,000 years? All possible, none confirmed. On the world of Vigilus, a critical strategic point that became the focus of intense fighting after the Great Rift's opening, Alpha Legion cells were identified operating within the planet's population. The cells had been established years before the crisis, positioned by the Alpha Legion's long-term planning apparatus to be available when the crisis arrived. Their activities during the Vigilus campaign ranged from sabotage of loyalist military infrastructure to the disruption of Genestealer cult operations that were themselves attempting to destabilize the planet. The Alpha Legion disrupted the Genestealer cults. This detail should not be passed over. The Alpha Legion, a traitor legion, a force classified as an enemy of the Imperium, actively fought against another enemy of the Imperium on Vigilus. The action could be interpreted as loyalist, the destruction of a Xenos threat that imperiled an Imperial world. It could also be interpreted as self-interested. The Genestealer cult's destabilization threatened the Alpha Legion's own networks, and the disruption was protection of the Alpha Legion's assets rather than defense of the Imperium's population. Both interpretations are supported by the facts. Neither is confirmed by them. Throughout the 41st Millennium's wars, this pattern repeats. The Alpha Legion appears in conflicts across the galaxy, fighting for causes that contradict each other, pursuing objectives that cannot be reconciled within a single strategic framework, and producing outcomes that benefit the Imperium and the enemies of the Imperium in roughly equal measure. The pattern is either meaningless, the random noise of a fragmented legion whose warbands pursue individual agendas without coordination, or it is the most complex strategy in the galaxy, a 10,000-year operation whose components look random because the plan they serve is too large and too long-running for any observer's frame of reference to encompass. The Imperium has tried to determine which. It has failed. In fairness, the Imperium may have been designed to fail. The Alpha Legion's 10,000-year investment in uncertainty may have produced a condition in which the truth about the Alpha Legion's purpose is genuinely unknowable, not because the truth does not exist, but because the mechanisms required to determine it have been systematically compromised by the force whose purpose they are trying to determine. This is the Alpha Legion's masterpiece, not any single operation, not any individual act of sabotage or infiltration or military engagement. The masterpiece is the condition itself, the permanent, structural, self-reinforcing uncertainty about what the Alpha Legion is, what it wants, and whether the Imperium's response to it is fighting an enemy or destroying an ally. The masterpiece has been 10,000 years in the making. It may never be finished. The Cabal is gone. The Xenos organization that approached Alpharius and Omegon with the prophecy that changed everything, the ancient council of alien races that claimed to have foreseen the heresy and its consequences, that presented the twin Primarchs with the choice between humanity's survival and the galaxy's salvation, did not survive the events it set in motion. The details of the Cabal's destruction are fragmentary, but the broad shape is known. The organization that had operated in the shadows of galactic civilization for millions of years was itself outmaneuvered by the forces of chaos, by the Imperium's own responses to the heresy, by the consequences of the prophecy it had shared with the Alpha Legion. The Cabal's grand strategy, which depended on the Alpha Legion executing a plan that spanned the length of the heresy, did not survive contact with the reality of 10,000 years of galactic history. John Grammaticus, the Perpetual who had served as the Cabal's envoy to the Alpha Legion, eventually turned against the Cabal. His reasons were complex. The morality of the Cabal's plan, which required the destruction of the human species, became increasingly difficult for a human being to maintain as the plan's costs became visible. The Perpetual, who had asked the Alpha Legion to sacrifice humanity, eventually decided that the sacrifice was not one he was willing to support. Whether the Cabal's prophecy was accurate, whether the futures it described were genuine possibilities or manipulative fabrications, remains one of the most debated questions in the Alpha Legion's story. If the prophecy was accurate, the Alpha Legion's choice was the most morally complex decision in human history. The twins chose to sacrifice their species to save the galaxy. and the magnitude of the sacrifice. Every human being, every world, every institution, every cultural achievement, everything that the Imperium was and represented is almost impossible to process. The Alpha Legion's defenders argue that this sacrifice was the ultimate act of loyalty. Loyalty not to the Emperor as a person, but to the Emperor's purpose, which was the defeat of chaos, and that the twins understood that the Emperor's purpose could only be achieved through the extinction of the Emperor's species. If the prophecy was false, if the Cabal was manipulating the twins for its own purposes, using a fabricated vision to turn two Primarchs against their father's Imperium, then the Alpha Legion's choice was the most consequential act of naivety in Imperial history. Two of the Emperor's sons, manipulated by aliens who had their own agenda, turned against the Imperium on the basis of a prophecy that was never going to come true, and the 10,000 years of ambiguity that followed were not the execution of a grand strategy, but the confusion of a legion that had been tricked and that never realized it. A third possibility exists, and it is the most characteristically Alpha Legion of the three. The twins saw through the Cabal's manipulation and used it. In this interpretation, Alpharius and Omegon recognized that the Cabal's prophecy was a tool rather than a truth, a lever that the aliens were trying to use to move the Primarchs in the direction the aliens wanted. And the twins, whose entire approach to warfare was built around the exploitation of tools that others tried to use against them, took the lever and turned it. They used the Cabal's prophecy as justification for the actions they had already decided to take. They used the Cabal's resources, its intelligence network, its ability to predict events, its connections to alien civilizations, for as long as those resources served the Alpha Legion's purposes, and then they discarded the Cabal when its usefulness expired. Omegon's final meeting with the Cabal representative, Atithirtir, conducted aboard a ship, terse and final. The twin Primarch, informing the Cabal that the Alpha Legion would fulfill its commitments without further external interference, supports this interpretation. The meeting sounds less like a servant reporting to his handlers and more like a business partner terminating a contract. The Alpha Legion would do what the Alpha Legion had decided to do. The Cabal's involvement was no longer required. The Cabal's destruction in this reading was not a failure of the Alpha Legion's grand strategy, but a consequence of it. The Alpha Legion had used the Cabal and had finished using it, and the Cabal's subsequent destruction was either a direct result of the Alpha Legion's actions or a natural consequence of a plan that the Cabal was never able to control. Whether any of these interpretations is correct, whether the twins were noble sacrifices, foolish pawns, or manipulative opportunists, is not determinable from the available evidence. And the available evidence may itself be an Alpha Legion creation, designed to support all three interpretations simultaneously, because maintaining multiple viable readings of the Alpha Legion's motivation is more useful than establishing any single reading as definitive. The Cabal is gone. The prophecy's accuracy is unverifiable. The twins made their choice, and the choice produced 10,000 years of ambiguity, and the ambiguity is all that remains. The Alpha Legion operates in the space where the Cabal's prophecy used to be, in the gap between what was predicted and what has actually happened. The Imperium has not decayed and been consumed by chaos in the way the Cabal's first future described, though the decay is real and the threat of consumption is present. Humanity has not been destroyed in the way the Cabal's second future described, though the destruction is ongoing in the slow sense of attrition. Neither future has manifested in its complete form, which means either the prophecy was wrong, or the timeline has not yet reached the point where the prophecy becomes right, or the Alpha Legion's actions across 10,000 years have changed the futures in ways the prophecy did not account for. The Alpha Legion may be fighting to fulfill the prophecy. It may be fighting to prevent the prophecy. It may be fighting to create a third option that the prophecy did not envision. A future in which neither the Emperor's victory nor Horus's produces the outcome the Cabal described, because the Alpha Legion has been working for 10 millennia to change the conditions that both futures depend on. This is the deepest layer of the mystery, and it is the layer that the 10,000 years of ambiguity have been building toward. The Alpha Legion is not fighting for Horus. Horus is dead. The Alpha Legion is not fighting for the Emperor. The Emperor sits on the golden throne in silence. The Alpha Legion is fighting for something else, something that neither the traitor cause nor the loyalist cause fully encompasses, something that the Cabal glimpsed and the twins understood, and that 10,000 years of operations across the galaxy have been advancing toward. What that something is, whether it is the destruction of chaos, the reformation of the Imperium, the creation of a post-imperial galactic order, or something that no one outside the Alpha Legion has ever conceived of, is the question at the center of the Hydra. The Hydra does not answer questions. It grows more heads. The Alpha Legion exists at the point where the Imperium's moral framework breaks down, and the breakdown is the most important thing about them. The Imperium operates on binaries, loyalty and treachery, human and alien, the Emperor's light and the darkness of chaos. These binaries are not nuanced. They are not designed to be nuanced. They are designed to be functional, to provide the trillion-strong population of 1 million worlds with a moral framework simple enough to be applied universally. You are either for the Emperor or against him. You are either loyal or you are a traitor. The middle ground does not exist, because the existence of middle ground would create the kind of moral complexity that the Imperium's population cannot be trusted to navigate without the simplicity that the binaries provide. The Alpha Legion occupies the middle ground that the Imperium insists does not exist. They are traitors who may be loyalists. They are the Emperor's enemies who may be his most committed servants. They fight against the Imperium on one world and for the Imperium on another, and the reason for both actions may be the same, and the reason may be something that the binary framework cannot classify, and the classification failure is not a limitation of the intelligence apparatus, but a limitation of the framework. This makes the Alpha Legion the most philosophically dangerous force in the galaxy. Not the most militarily dangerous. The Alpha Legion does not have the raw destructive capability of a chaos-empowered World Eater's warband, or the corrupting biological weaponry of the Death Guard, or the reality-warping sorcery of the Thousand Suns. Its danger is conceptual. The Alpha Legion's existence challenges the fundamental premise on which the Imperium's moral authority rests. the proposition that the distinction between loyalty and treachery is always clear. If the Alpha Legion is genuinely fighting for the Emperor while appearing to fight against him, if the deepest treachery is actually the deepest loyalty, if the force that the Imperium has been trying to destroy for 10,000 years is the force that has been trying to save it, then the Imperium's moral framework is not just incomplete. It is actively harmful, because the framework classifies the Alpha Legion as an enemy, and if the Alpha Legion is not an enemy, then the framework has been directing the Imperium's resources against a potential ally for 10,000 years. And the cost of that misdirection, measured in warriors lost, worlds devastated, opportunities missed, is incalculable. If the Alpha Legion is genuinely fighting against the Emperor, if the loyalist interpretation is a comfortable fiction that the Alpha Legion has cultivated to prevent the Imperium from committing the full force required to destroy them, then the philosophical danger is real in a different way, because the possibility that the Alpha Legion might be loyal has stayed the Imperium's hand. Inquisitors who suspect Alpha Legion involvement in an operation must consider the possibility that the operation serves the Imperium's interests before they act against it. And the consideration creates delay, and the delay creates opportunities that a genuine enemy can exploit. Either way, the Alpha Legion wins. The ambiguity is the weapon, and the weapon works regardless of which interpretation is correct, because both interpretations produce outcomes that serve the Alpha Legion's operational needs. This is genius. Cold, amoral, terrifying genius that has been functioning for 10,000 years, and that shows no sign of degrading. The Alpha Legion created a condition in which the truth about their loyalty is less important than the uncertainty about it, and the uncertainty is self-sustaining, because every attempt to resolve it produces new evidence that supports both interpretations. The Imperium cannot destroy the Alpha Legion without destroying the possibility that the Alpha Legion is fighting for the Imperium. The Imperium cannot embrace the Alpha Legion without accepting the possibility that the Alpha Legion is fighting against it. The only option is the present condition. Perpetual war against an enemy that may be an ally, conducted with the resources and the intensity that the uncertainty permits, which is always less than total commitment, because total commitment requires certainty that is not available. The Alpha Legion has made the Imperium's certainty impossible. In a civilization that depends on certainty, that cannot function without the clear, binary distinctions that its institutional framework requires. The destruction of certainty is the most subversive act available. This is what the Alpha Legion is, stripped of the operational details and the tactical analysis and the specific accounts of battles and operations that the available records contain. It is the force that destroyed certainty, and certainty, once destroyed, cannot be rebuilt, because the rebuilding would require trusting the information that the Alpha Legion has been compromising for 10,000 years, and the trust is not available because the Alpha Legion has ensured that it will never be available again. The Hydra does not die. The heads regrow, the certainty does not return, and the Imperium, deprived of the certainty that its existence requires, must continue to function in the space that the Alpha Legion has created between what it knows and what it fears. That space is the Alpha Legion's home. They built it. They live in it. They have no intention of leaving. The Great Rift was the most significant change in the galaxy's strategic landscape since the Heresy itself, and the Alpha Legion's response to it tells you something about the Legion's current operational posture, or at least it tells you something about what the Alpha Legion wants you to believe its operational posture is. The Cicatrix Maledictum divided the galaxy. Communication across the rift became unreliable. The Astronomican's light did not reach the dark side. Worlds that had been connected to the Imperium's infrastructure were severed from it, left to fend for themselves against threats that the pre-Rift Imperium had been managing through coordination that the Rift destroyed. These are exactly the conditions in which the Alpha Legion's methods are most effective. A galaxy in which communication is unreliable is a galaxy in which false communications are more difficult to distinguish from genuine ones. A galaxy in which isolated worlds are fighting for survival is a galaxy in which an Alpha Legion operative offering assistance to a beleaguered governor is more likely to be accepted without the kind of scrutiny that peacetime would provide. A galaxy in which the Imperium's institutions are strained past their capacity is a galaxy in which the Alpha Legion's infiltration networks, already deeply embedded, already positioned across every segmentum, can operate with reduced risk of detection, because the institutions that would detect them are occupied with more immediate crises. The Alpha Legion has been active, more active by some assessments than at any point since the Heresy itself. Across both halves of the divided galaxy, Alpha Legion cells have activated, some conducting operations against Imperial targets, some conducting operations against Chaos forces, some conducting operations whose purpose the Imperium's intelligence apparatus cannot classify. In the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half, cut off from the Astronomicon, Alpha Legion warbands have been reported operating in the void between isolated worlds, moving through the darkness with the ease of a force that has spent 10,000 years learning to operate without the Imperium's support infrastructure. These warbands do not appear to be receiving direction from any central authority. They do not appear to be coordinating with each other. They operate with the autonomous effectiveness that the Alpha Legion's doctrine was designed to produce, and the autonomy is either the evidence of genuine fragmentation or the evidence of a command structure so distributed that it is indistinguishable from fragmentation. In the Imperium's Sanctus, the lit half, where the Astronomicon still functions, Alpha Legion operations have intensified as well. The Great Crusade has encountered Alpha Legion resistance and Alpha Legion assistance in different sectors, and the Crusade's intelligence apparatus has been unable to determine whether the two are connected. Guilliman, the returned Primarch, has direct experience of the Alpha Legion from the Heresy and from the Battle of Escrador, and his institutional response to the Legion's current activities reflects that experience. He does not trust any Alpha Legion contact, positive or negative, to be what it appears. Whether Guilliman's distrust is justified, whether the Alpha Legion's current activities are the continuation of a plan that began with the Cabal's prophecy, or the random noise of a fragmented force, is a question the returned Primarch has not publicly answered. What his forces have done is practical. They have treated every Alpha Legion contact as hostile, regardless of the apparent nature of the contact, on the principle that the safest response to an enemy whose intentions cannot be determined is to treat every contact as adversarial. The Alpha Legion has adapted to this response the way it adapts to everything, by incorporating the response into its operational planning. If the Imperium treats all Alpha Legion contacts as hostile, then the Alpha Legion's contacts, including the ones that genuinely serve the Imperium's interests, if any exist, will be conducted through intermediaries that the Imperium does not identify as Alpha Legion. The intermediaries may be human agents. They may be other military forces manipulated into acting on intelligence the Alpha Legion has provided without knowing the source. They may be institutions that have been infiltrated so thoroughly that their actions serve the Alpha Legion's purposes without the institutions understanding that they are doing so. The game continues. The Rift has changed the board, not the game. The pieces have shifted, the conditions have evolved, but the fundamental dynamic, the Alpha Legion operating in the gap between what the Imperium knows and what it fears, is unchanged because the dynamic does not depend on any particular galactic geography. It depends on the Alpha Legion's ability to generate uncertainty, and that ability is not affected by whether the galaxy is connected or divided. The Great Rift has, if anything, made the Alpha Legion more effective. Not because the Rift gave them new capabilities, but because the Rift removed the institutional coherence that was the Imperium's primary tool for managing the uncertainty the Alpha Legion produces. A connected Imperium can, in theory, assemble a comprehensive picture of Alpha Legion activity across the galaxy and detect the patterns that reveal coordination. A divided Imperium cannot assemble this picture because the information required to assemble it cannot cross the rift. The Alpha Legion anticipated this. Whether they contributed to the events that produced the rift, whether Alpha Legion operations in the Cadian Gate region were part of the chain of events that led to Cadia's fall and the rift's opening, is yet another question in the growing catalogue of questions that the Alpha Legion generates and does not answer. The possibility that the Alpha Legion helped cause the Great Rift is horrifying in its implications. If true, it would mean the Alpha Legion's strategy operates at a galactic scale, that the Legion's planning horizon encompasses events of civilization-ending magnitude, that the destruction of Cadia and the division of the Imperium were components of a plan whose ultimate purpose is something the Alpha Legion has been working toward for 10,000 years. If false, the possibility itself is still useful to the Alpha Legion, because the Imperium's inability to rule it out consumes intelligence, resources, and attention that could be directed at more tractable problems. This is the Alpha Legion's contribution to the current era. Not a single operation, not a military campaign. A condition, the permanent state of uncertainty that the galaxy's most elusive force maintains through the simple act of continuing to exist without revealing what it is doing or why. The condition is the weapon. The weapon is deployed. The weapon is working. And nobody can tell whether the working is helping or hurting, which is exactly how the weapon was designed. The Imperium's warriors are trained to fight enemies they can see, understand, and classify. The Alpha Legion breaks all three of these assumptions and the breaking produces effects on the warriors and institutions that encounter them that go beyond the military. An Imperial Guard regiment deployed to a world where Alpha Legion activity has been confirmed operates differently from a regiment deployed against any other enemy. The soldiers watch each other, not in the casual way that combat veterans maintain situational awareness of their comrades' positions, but with a quality of suspicion that corrodes the unit cohesion the Imperial Guard depends on. The knowledge that the Alpha Legion uses human agents, that any member of the regiment might be compromised, that any piece of intelligence might be fabricated, that any order might have originated from a source other than the command it claims to come from, produces a state of institutional paranoia that degrades the regiment's effectiveness before a single engagement occurs. Commissars report that Alpha Legion engagements produce more discipline problems than any other kind of combat deployment. Not desertion, not cowardice, the problems that commissars are traditionally employed to address. Something more subtle. A quality of hesitation in following orders, born from the awareness that the orders might be Alpha Legion fabrications. A reluctance to share intelligence, born from the awareness that the intelligence might be used by the Alpha Legion's operatives to improve their own understanding of the Imperial position. A degradation of trust between officers and soldiers, between units and their neighbors, between the regiment and the wider military structure it operates within. The Alpha Legion does not need to infiltrate the regiment to produce these effects. The knowledge that infiltration is possible is sufficient. The soldiers know what the Alpha Legion does. The knowledge contaminates their operations, even in the absence of actual infiltration, because the possibility of infiltration produces the same behavioral changes as the reality. This is the Alpha Legion's most efficient use of resources, producing effects without committing forces. A world that is merely suspected of Alpha Legion activity, where no operative has been confirmed, where no cell has been identified, where the suspicion is based on patterns that might be coincidence, is a world whose institutions are already degraded by the suspicion. The planetary governor who suspects Alpha Legion infiltration trusts his advisors less. The military commander who suspects compromised intelligence doubts her own planning. The ecclesiastical prelate who suspects that the local religious movement is an Alpha Legion front investigates his parishioners with a suspicion that poisons the relationship between clergy and community. All of these effects serve the Alpha Legion's interests regardless of whether the Alpha Legion has any actual presence on the world. The suspicion is the weapon. The weapon fires itself. Space Marines who fight the Alpha Legion experience a different kind of disorientation. The Astartes are trained to regard their enemies as inferior. The standard confidence of a transhuman warrior facing opponents who are, in most cases, physically and cognitively less capable than he is. Against the Alpha Legion, this confidence is misplaced because the Alpha Legionnaires are Space Marines as well, warriors with the same physical capabilities, the same augmented cognition, the same training, the same war gear, but the Alpha Legion fights differently. Where most traitor legions fight with the enhanced ferocity that chaos provides, the World Eater's berserker rage, the Plague Marine's putrid resilience, the Noise Marine's sensory assault, the Alpha Legion fights with intelligence. Cool, calculated, eerily familiar intelligence, because the Alpha Legion fights like loyal space marines. Their tactical formations are recognizable. Their engagement patterns follow the doctrines that every Astartes force learns. The Alpha Legionnaire who fires from behind cover, advances by bounds, coordinates with his squad. This warrior could be a loyal battle brother from any chapter. The familiarity is the disorientation. Fighting an enemy who looks like you, sounds like you, and fights like you produces a quality of cognitive friction that is different from the revulsion the chaos-marked traitors provoke. The World Eaters are visibly, unmistakably the enemy. The Alpha Legion warrior who claims to be Alpharius and who fights with the clean discipline of a pre-heresy Astartes. This warrior raises the question of whether the distinction between the loyal and the traitor is as clear as the Imperium insists. Chaplains who have supervised Astartes forces in Alpha Legion engagements report that the post-engagement morale management is more demanding than after any other kind of fight. Not because the casualties are heavier. The Alpha Legion typically inflicts fewer casualties than a head-on engagement with the World Eaters or the Death Guard would produce. Because the engagement leaves the warriors with questions that standard debriefing cannot address. Were we fighting the enemy? Were we being tested? Was the engagement a distraction from something else the Alpha Legion was doing while we were focused on the fight? Did the enemy want us to win? Was our victory actually our defeat in a game we did not know we were playing? These questions do not have answers. The chaplain cannot provide answers because the chaplain does not have them. What the chaplain can provide is the reassurance that the Emperor's service does not require understanding, that the warrior's duty is to fight the enemy that is before him, regardless of what the enemy's hidden purposes might be, and that the fighting is righteous because the Emperor commands it. This reassurance helps. It does not fully address the problem, because the problem is not a lack of reassurance. The problem is a lack of certainty, and the certainty the Alpha Legion has destroyed cannot be restored by the chaplain's words. The Inquisitors, who specialize in Alpha Legion countermeasures, are the most affected. These are the individuals who spend their careers inside the uncertainty that the Alpha Legion produces, and the long-term effects on their psychological stability are documented in files that the Ordo Hereticus does not share freely. An Inquisitor who has spent decades trying to determine whether a particular Alpha Legion operation is genuine or fabricated, who has examined every piece of evidence from every angle and arrived at conclusions that are immediately undermined by new evidence that may itself be fabricated. This Inquisitor is operating in conditions that produce a quality of epistemological exhaustion that borders on dysfunction. Some of the Imperium's best Inquisitors have been lost to Alpha Legion assignments. Not killed, lost. Consumed by the investigation, drawn so deeply into the layers of deception and counter-deception that they can no longer determine what is real, producing reports that oscillate between incompatible conclusions with each new piece of evidence, eventually reaching the point where the Inquisitor's own colleagues cannot determine whether the Inquisitor's conclusions are the product of genuine analysis or the product of Alpha Legion manipulation of the Inquisitor's analytical process. The Alpha Legion breaks people, not through violence, through doubt. The doubt is a weapon that does not run out of ammunition. and every institution that encounters the Alpha Legion discovers that the ammunition has been stockpiled in advance. Strip everything away. The operations, the networks, the war bands, the battles, the cabal, the prophecy, the contradictory origin stories, the twin Primarchs who may or may not be dead, the 10,000 years of ambiguity that the Imperium's intelligence apparatus has been trying to resolve without success. Strip all of it away and ask the question that remains: what is the Alpha Legion? Option 1. They are traitors. The Cabal's prophecy was a convenient justification for a decision the twins had already made: to side with Horus, to betray the Emperor, to join the winning side of a war they had been quietly evaluating since the Great Crusade began. The loyalist interpretation is a fiction maintained by the Alpha Legion's operatives to confuse the Imperium's response. The operations that appear to serve the Imperium are designed to prevent the Imperium from committing the resources required to destroy the Alpha Legion. Everything is deception. There is no deeper purpose. The Alpha Legion is chaos-serving vermin that has been gnawing at the Imperium's foundations for 10 millennia, and the gnawing is the purpose. This interpretation is clean. It is simple. It resolves the ambiguity in the direction that the Imperium's moral categories require. It classifies the Alpha Legion as an enemy and justifies the expenditure of whatever resources are necessary to destroy it. It asks no uncomfortable questions about the limits of the Imperium's moral framework or the possibility that the framework is too simple to accommodate what the Alpha Legion actually is. The problem with this interpretation is the evidence, not the evidence that supports it, which is abundant. The evidence that contradicts it, which is also abundant. The Alpha Legion operations that have genuinely helped the Imperium, the war bands that have fought chaos, the operatives who have provided accurate intelligence to Imperial forces, the pattern of activity that, viewed across centuries rather than individual incidents, does not look like the pattern of a force that is simply trying to destroy the Imperium. A force that was simply trying to destroy the Imperium would not help the Imperium as often as the Alpha Legion does. The helping is either genuine, evidence of loyalist purpose, or it is the most elaborate and costly cover operation in history, maintained for 10,000 years at a cost in resources and opportunity that no rational military planner would accept unless the payoff was proportionally enormous. Option 2. They are loyalists. The Cabal's prophecy was the framework for a plan that transcends the heresy's binary of loyalty and treachery. The twins chose to serve the Emperor's ultimate purpose, the destruction of chaos, by appearing to betray the Imperium, and the 10,000 years of ambiguity have been the execution of a plan so vast that its components look like random noise to observers who cannot see the pattern. This interpretation is romantic. It transforms the Alpha Legion from the Imperium's most treacherous enemy into its most committed defender. It answers the question of why the Alpha Legion has never fully committed to the traitor cause, never retreated to the Eye of Terror, never submitted to chaos the way the other traitor legions have. It explains the operations that help the Imperium as genuine loyalty expressed through the most indirect possible means. The problem with this interpretation is that it requires the Alpha Legion to have maintained a coherent strategy across 10,000 years without a confirmed living Primarch, without centralized command, without the institutional infrastructure that a 10,000-year strategy requires. The plan would need to be self-executing, embedded in the Legion's culture so deeply that individual warbands would carry it forward without understanding the full scope of what they were carrying. This is possible. The Alpha Legion designed itself for exactly this kind of distributed operation, but the improbability of maintaining a single coherent strategy across 10 millennia, through the fragmenting effects of time and distance and the corrupting influence of the warp, strains belief. Option 3. They are neither. The Alpha Legion began with a purpose. The Cabal's prophecy, the Twins' choice, and the purpose has been lost across 10,000 years of fragmentation and corruption, and the slow erosion that time produces in every institution, including institutions designed to resist erosion. The warbands that operate under the Alpha Legion's banner are no longer executing a plan. They are executing the habits of a plan, the remnants of a strategy that made sense once, and that has decayed into a set of behaviors that look like coordination, but that are actually the inertia of a force that no longer knows what it is fighting for. This interpretation is the most depressing and possibly the most accurate. It explains the contradictions. Warbands that serve chaos alongside warbands that fight chaos, as the result of fragmentation rather than deliberate design. It explains the ambiguity as the natural product of a force that has lost its unifying purpose and that maintains the appearance of purposefulness, because the appearance is all it has left. Option 4. And this is the option that keeps the Inquisition's analysts awake at night, is that all three interpretations are simultaneously true. Different warbands have different purposes. Some are genuinely chaos-serving, some are genuinely loyalist, some have lost their purpose and are running on institutional inertia. And somewhere, directing some of these warbands without directing others, maintaining the plan while allowing the fragments that have fallen away from the plan to fall. Somewhere, a central authority exists that is executing the original strategy while simultaneously managing the fragmentary elements that have drifted away from it. This interpretation means the Alpha Legion is both traitor and loyalist, both coherent and fragmented, both purposeful and aimless, depending on which element you are looking at. The Hydra's heads do not all serve the same purpose. Some of the heads have gone rogue, some of the heads are still connected to the body, and the body, the central intelligence, the remaining Primarch, the guiding purpose, is somewhere in the galaxy, watching it all, adjusting the plan to account for the fragments that have broken off, incorporating the fragmentation itself into the strategy. This is the most terrifying option, because it means the Alpha Legion is both more and less than what it appears to be. It is a force that contains genuine traitors and genuine loyalists and genuine agents of chaos and genuine defenders of the Imperium, all operating under the same name, wearing the same colors, claiming the same identity. I am Alpharius. Every head of the Hydra says it. Some of the heads are loyal, some are treacherous, some are mad, some are purposeful. And you cannot tell which is which. That is the Alpha Legion. Somewhere in the galaxy, a warrior in blue-green armor is doing something that nobody else understands. He may be fighting for the Emperor. He may be fighting against the Emperor. He may be executing a plan that began 10,000 years ago. Or he may be acting on his own initiative with no connection to any larger strategy. He may be the Primarch wearing the appearance of an ordinary legionnaire. He may be an ordinary legionnaire wearing the Primarch's identity. He may be something else entirely, a piece in a game whose board is the galaxy and whose rules have never been fully explained to any of the players. He calls himself Alpharius. Everyone in the Alpha Legion calls himself Alpharius. The name is the mask, and the mask is the face, and the face is the identity, and the identity is the Legion, and the Legion is the plan. And the plan is the thing that nobody understands, including, perhaps, the Alpha Legion itself. This is what the Imperium has been fighting for 10,000 years. Not a military force in the conventional sense, though the Alpha Legion can fight military engagements when fighting is what the situation requires. Not a chaos cult. Though some Alpha Legion elements have embraced the ruinous powers with sincerity that the Alpha Legion's loyalist defenders cannot comfortably explain. Not a loyalist fifth column, though the evidence for loyalist purpose is persistent and credible and has survived every attempt to debunk it. Something that does not fit the categories. Something that exists in the gaps between what the Imperium's categories can classify, and that has been operating in those gaps for 10,000 years, growing stronger, because the gaps are where the Alpha Legion does its best work. The Imperium has not defeated the Alpha Legion. The Imperium will not defeat the Alpha Legion. Not because the Alpha Legion is militarily invincible. The Legion can be fought, and individual operations can be disrupted, and specific cells can be destroyed. But because the Alpha Legion's power does not reside in its military capability, it resides in the uncertainty that the military capability protects, and the uncertainty is not something that military force can destroy. You cannot shoot doubt. You cannot bomb ambiguity. You cannot send a crusade fleet to conquer the space between two contradictory interpretations of the same evidence. The Alpha Legion lives in that space, and the space is not a physical location that can be assaulted. It is an epistemological condition, a permanent state of not knowing that the Imperium must navigate every day, in every sector, on every world where the possibility of Alpha Legion activity exists, which is every world. 10,000 years ago, two Primarchs made a choice. Or they were manipulated into a choice, or they engineered the appearance of a choice to serve purposes that the choice's apparent logic did not reveal. The twins looked at a prophecy offered by aliens who had their own agenda and decided, for reasons that may have been noble or foolish or calculated or some combination of all three, to break the binary that the Imperium depended on. The breaking has not been repaired. The binary, loyal or traitor, for or against the Emperor's light or the enemy's darkness, was the structure that held the Imperium's moral authority together, and the Alpha Legion shattered it, not with force, with the suggestion that the binary was too simple, that the galaxy contained possibilities the categories could not accommodate, that the distinction between the light and the dark was not a line but a spectrum, and that the spectrum contained positions that the binary's architects had not imagined. The suggestion was enough. The suggestion was always going to be enough. because the binary's strength was its simplicity, and simplicity is the first casualty of complexity. And the Alpha Legion is the most complex force the galaxy has ever produced. Hydra Dominatus. The Hydra endures. The heads multiply. The body persists somewhere, directing or not directing, planning or having finished planning, watching the galaxy work through the consequences of the choice that was made 10,000 years ago. For the Emperor or not. The Alpha Legion does not explain. The Alpha Legion has never explained. And after 10,000 years, the Imperium has begun to suspect, with the specific, creeping, corrosive suspicion that the Alpha Legion cultivates as its primary weapon, that an explanation may never come, that the ambiguity is not a temporary condition that will eventually be resolved, that the Alpha Legion's purpose is not something that will be revealed in a climactic moment of clarity when the masks come off and the truth is finally spoken, that the ambiguity is the purpose, that the uncertainty is the plan, that the 10,000-year mystery is not concealing a secret, but is itself the secret. And the secret is that there is no resolution, and the absence of resolution is the thing the Alpha Legion has been building toward since the day the Cabal's prophecy made the twins look at the galaxy and decide that the galaxy's certainties were not to be trusted. I am Alpharius. You do not know what that means. Neither, perhaps, does the warrior who says it, but the galaxy will continue to find out.